what we're often looking for when we're actually genuinely trying to leverage PLG in a model that requires sales to get that economic buyer involved and decision made. What it takes is helping that functional user get to a certain point of value in their product usage where they're like, yeah, this thing can work for us and this thing matters.
And it sounds like this connection between product and sales. If you're going to do this stuff, there needs to be this good glue between product and sales, no?
Oh boy. Well, yeah. And I mean, that's where this always falls down. Welcome to the Forget the Funnel podcast, where we help SaaS and recurring revenue businesses stop guessing and start making more customer-led and data-backed decisions about how to grow. We're a product marketing and growth consultancy that helps teams learn from their best customers, map and measure their experiences to unlock your most effective levers for growth. If you're ready to evolve past best practices and other people's playbooks, because you know that what got you here won't get you there, then this show is for you. With that, let's dive into the episode.
Hey, Gia, we're back. It's been a while. How you been?
I've missed you. It's good to see you again.
You can tell we're wearing the same time.
I was gonna ask,
wearing the
we
last time. We
change
should
our
have
outfits?
changed.
Yeah.
We should have changed our outfits. We've been busted. We're recording multiple things together, but that's because this is so much fun. Today we're talking about product-led sales. And so we recorded something earlier where we were talking about the difference between messaging and positioning. And it's interesting, we kept getting kind of side pulled into talking about pure kind of a sales motion versus a combination product-led growth with a sales motion. And so we thought it would be a good thing to cover this. And this is a lot of the companies you work with are pure product-led growth. A lot of the companies that I work with have a PLG thing, but then they have a sales thing over top. So I thought this would be a fun one for us to talk about because I think there's some overlap there, but I think we deal with slightly different kinds of companies. So it'd be fun to kind of explore that. So talk to us about product-led sales. Like, what do we mean when we talk about that?
This is a topic that, like, product-led sales is such a trendy kind of term because, I mean, I talk to a lot of teams that, like, they're doing product-led sales, but they don't call it product-led sales.
That's right.
And a lot of the teams that we work with, yes, they are product-led. And I think thinking about it in terms of like the center of gravity is helpful because we work with teams who are product-led and they have maybe a small sales org, but they're mostly like inside sales. They're not, like I keep referring to now, like the center of gravity of things. Like this team is really looking to build a lot of demand on the front end of the product at the sort of functional user level. And they want to use those functional users as their sort of acquisition model. And so for product-led sales, that's even the case if they're selling into very complex organizations. They still want to leverage this product at the front end. So product-led sales, I don't know what the sort of official definition of it is.
Me neither. And you know what? As marketers, we just make up definitions for things.
I know. Well, we could call it PLG with a sales motion. We could call it like a sales-led org that leverages the product, leverages PLG in some way.
Yeah. In my opinion, there's all kinds of flavors of that, right? Like I work with a lot of companies that have a free trial and they don't think that's product-led growth at all.
Right.
So they're like, this is not a product-led growth thing. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I think the PLG people would say it is.
Exactly. And I know we work with some teams too where they're more sales-led and they're like, we know we can be leveraging the product more. We want to start leveraging the product for acquisition, either because like the unit economics just don't work out, or they recognize that mostly who's coming through the front door is that functional user, and that trying to go direct with an outbound model to the economic buyer isn't working for them.
Well, I mean, I think this is a very good distinction that I don't think people understand enough. That often in a product-led growth motion, what we have are these kind of two constituents. So we've got the end user, and then we have, what would maybe be an economic buyer.
Yeah.
That is like a manager or an executive and not necessarily the user of the product at all.
Right.
And so we need to decide who's the right champion in this account, like who can make a deal happen. And often, there's this assumption that we'll get the end users in and then we'll upsell the end users on something.
Mm-hmm.
But then sometimes the end user does not actually have the ability to do that. They go up to the manager. Well, the manager's got a different definition of value. The manager's like, well, what's in it for me? Like, I don't care if all you guys use this.
Yeah. And it depends. Like it's not always one It's not always one, right? In some cases, it genuinely is that functional user because of the pricing model, or, because it's like sometimes it's because it's usage-based pricing, or because the functional user happens to also make the economic decisions for their team, or have, budget control, but not always. So in the case of product-led sales, what I would say is it's where it changes hands. And, it goes from a functional user to an economic buyer. And so what we're often looking for when we're actually genuinely trying to leverage PLG in a model that requires sales to get that economic buyer involved and decision made, what it takes is helping that functional user get to a certain point of value in their product usage where they're like, yeah, this thing can work for us and this thing matters. How long of a time they can use the product in a useful way is not always the same. Sometimes it's over a long period of time and then they hit this threshold. Sometimes there's like shadow IT going on where they can
Oh, yeah.
use it for a little while
Absolutely.
and kind of get away with it.
I don't think the PLG people think enough about shadow IT.
Oh yeah, that's a
Because
it's
a
a
lot of times
real
that's exactly what they're doing.
a
Like, that's
real
exactly what they are, is shadow
totally.
IT.
In fact, I would say that many of the companies that have that more upmarket customer base, they don't understand how that product is being used and the sort of threshold, and they often don't see the opportunity to go back into their existing functional user base to identify who those not only economic buyers are, but who those enterprise deals might be in that
Yeah.
sort of low touch offering. And like, I don't like this analogy, but it can be like, what is the analogy? Like shooting fish in a bucket or something. Like you've got this like
I
amazing
believe it's a
opportunity.
barrel. For some reason, we have fish in a barrel and we're shooting them. Why would we? I don't know.
Fish in a barrel. Thank you. I was like, what is the other that analogy? But I say all that to say that
Which
the
now
sales,
you think about it, it sounds like the dumbest thing. Like, why would we do that?
yeah.
But
Well, because
okay.
and they put the sales team out doing this outbound motion to, like, net new customers, and that's, like, they're only focused on that when, like, actually, you've got this whole base of customers that are using your product in really interesting ways, and their ICP actually lines up perfectly
Yeah.
for your sales
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
So, I would say that, like, in terms of, a definition of product-led sales or whatever you wanna call it, which really isn't that important, is, like, the sales team is engaging customers who have gotten some sort of value instead of, like, going direct out to the market. It's like taking advantage of the customer base and the sort of pushes in the market to use a product like yours, and they basically can go to that customer base of people who actually really love your product. They're using it in really interesting ways, and you identify your ICP in there, you identify and we'll talk about the, definitions of all these things, PQA and PQL and all that. But, like, the sales team doesn't reach out from somebody on your website. It's not book a demo on your website. It's try
Right.
it, get to some moment of value, use the product
Yeah.
in a meaningful way so that sales is talking to, like, amazing product fit customers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I've seen companies use this in a bunch of different ways in the clients I've worked with. But like a lot of times, if they have really great adoption on, whatever the free or
Low cost, whatever way.
thing
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
they're using that as signal. So like, I've worked with a couple of companies where they have this very limited functionality thing that they give away for free. And just everybody and their dog uses it. And so it's everywhere. And what the sales team is doing is looking for penetration in an account. So,
Yes.
once we hit something like more than 5 users or
Yep.
more than 10 users,
Yep.
then what the sales team is trying to do is come in over top and talk at an executive level
Mhm.
and sell this much bigger thing
Yep.
and say, "Look, like, we have this bigger thing that could be used by departments that are not using it, but we see already that this group is using it, and so it works for this part of your process. But look, there's this other value if you were using it across all this other parts." And
Yeah.
so
That's
that
right.
seems like a nice, sensible thing. But I think a lot of companies aren't really thinking about, like, even that company. So a couple of companies I'll give you examples for. So one was, I had this great conversation with the founder of Postman, and he was telling me about when they started, they were an open source thing. They were giving it away for free, and they weren't concerned about how they were going to monetize it. It was kind of their side hustle thing at the beginning, and then it really took off. And he said even at the moment when he raised his first round of financing, they really didn't know how they were gonna monetize it. So the idea was, "I don't know, we'll figure something out." And so they didn't know if they were gonna upsell, cross-sell these same users on other things, or if
Mhm.
they were gonna have some other thing. And then eventually, where they landed in the product strategy was this idea of the original idea was they had this API testing tool. And then they started thinking about, well, what's our mission here? Our mission is to deliver amazing APIs. But if you look at what's holding us back from delivering amazing APIs, well, we're actually using different tools across the API lifecycle. Like everybody's using us for testing, but they're using something else to do development. So when testing finds a problem, then it's got to go to development. They fix it in a different tool and then it comes back and there's all this lag and things going back and forth in different tools. And then same thing with when we go to take the API and deliver it out to people, we use different tools to do documentation and different tools to distribute the API and different tools to package it up and all this stuff. But if we had the same tool that could do all of that for the full life cycle, then the end result would be we'd ship APIs faster, the APIs would be much higher quality. And so that's kind of where they ended up leading. But then you think, well, who do we sell that to? Well, it's not the developer that's, using my freebie thing, product-led growth API testing tool. They don't care. They're just the testing people.
Mhm.
So they then had to figure out, well, how do we get in to this? Who's the right person to sell to pitch this bigger thing? What's the value proposition for them? And so the positioning they're using for the PLG part of this motion is very different than the positioning that they use for this over the top sales motion.
Yep,
But I think it's
that's right.
complicated. I think a lot of companies don't think about all the
Very complicated.
where do you think people screw this stuff up? Like, because you've worked with a lot of companies like this that are more pure PLG. Like, what's their biggest problem? Like, when you go in there, like, what is the thing that you're like, "Oh god, yeah, everybody messes this up."
When it comes to, like, layering in sales, you mean? When it comes to
Yeah.
product-led sales? We're working with the team on this right now, actually. In that situation, we wanna help customers get to value on their own. Okay, I'm gonna make the example of, it's a landlord, basically, like, property management tool. Super, super vertical, and we haven't actually gone through the whole customer experience mapping exercise with them yet, but, we're starting to think about it, and we're gonna go in a week from now and really dig into, like, how can they help lower the touch? And what we have found is that regardless of the number of tenancies, so, like, number of properties, so you can imagine, like, I own 200 properties, I'm managing 200 properties versus and they have those, versus these customers who are coming through the front door who have, like, 1 or 2. And what we
Yeah.
learned was that the sort of context that these people are in actually has no correlation with the number of tenancy, which
Interesting.
is kind of frustrating for this team. It was kind of frustrating. We were hoping to see a correlation and like, no, actually there's no direct correlation between in their jobs to be done. So it's going to be important for them to figure out what is the context that a customer's in. Again, I'm using jobs to be done, but like I only mean by that is like the context of somebody coming through. What's the problem they're trying to solve coming through the front door? And also find out the number of tenancies because legitimately, if one of these landlords has 100, 200, locations or rentals or, tenancies again, they are going to need handholding. They're going to need sales. They're going to need an onboarding specialist to get them over the hump of the onboarding because it's just such a big lift for them. And also it's worth so much more. Their willingness to pay is obviously way higher. And so
It's a higher value deal, and they're not just gonna sign up without talking to somebody.
that's right. There is an opportunity for us to show them value in the product without involving sales because of what
Right.
they told us really matters to them. And there's very specific parts of the product that we can surface to them very early in that customer experience to then demonstrate to even the big guys that like, oh yeah, this thing is going to solve my problem because we can show them what in this case it's like this bird's eye view of being able to understand at a very high level many, many properties. And there's like these different, I'm not going to get into the details of the feature set that really stands out to those big tenancies, but or those bigger landlords. But helping the team figure out who to reach out to and when, what the threshold for the number of tenancies should be, and also what to say when you do reach out. And so that's like a really small example.
And it sounds like this connection between product and sales. If you're gonna do this stuff, there needs to be this good glue between product and sales, no?
Oh, boy. Well, yeah, and I mean, that's where this always falls down, and so the other example I have is at the opposite extreme of this. This is a company that I don't know that I can I can necessarily name, So I won't name them, but let's say, what is their user base at? They've got like 6 million users. They sell to individuals, basically at the consumer level, all the way up to like Fortune 100, like huge span of customers. That is a perfect scenario for product led sales. Like you would have to incorporate some sort of product led sales motion in that. And also because they're so ubiquitous and because they've been around so long, they're so established in the market, everybody expects a PLG motion, even the enterprise folks in those case. So helping that team identify the ICP that comes through the front door. What does ICP even mean for them? What is
Yeah.
important from an ICP standpoint, ideal customer profile? So helping them figure that out. But then also, what's the product usage the sales team should be looking at, or a product qualified account, which I'm just like throwing out these terms. Basically, product qualified account, you can think of as like that hitting that 7 threshold that we talked about. Like there's 7 people from a company now using the product.
Right.
So you know that you've gotten a certain amount of like saturation, or you've jumped into another team, which is also very interesting, and you've used the
Yes.
product in a way that indicates that you have a more complex organization.
A couple of the folks that I work with use that as a metric. Like once it spreads beyond more than one team, then the
Yes.
salespeople call.
Yeah, exactly. But where I see a lot of teams mess up is that the ICP shows up through the front door and they're like, "Huh," and sales just like jumps on them, even though you haven't actually gotten in there yet. And like that might not even be the right person.
That's bad. Like, that's just kind of, I know that I don't think it's bad. Like, I think in some ways, it's in some cases it's appropriate, but it's
Sometimes.
appropriate
Yeah.
where the client always needs handholding from sales. In which case, I would question why you're doing a product like growth, or you're trying to do a product like growth thing in the first place. Like, maybe it's just not appropriate. Like, I do think that we have these things come in waves, right? And, there was a period there where everybody was trying to do product led growth, and then a bunch of companies kind of failed at it. And in my opinion, they were companies where the product just wasn't appropriate. And if you looked at the size of the deal and the complexity of the deal and the complexity of the product, it was just easier to sell with a salesperson involved versus not a salesperson involved. And the size of the deal was big enough to support it. So why not do that? But it was trendy for a while. Like everybody was like, "Oh my god, if we're not doing PLG, we're dead." Again, and you see these PLG experts. I in the middle of this, I remember thinking we had reached peak PLG. That there was a PLG expert, and I opened up LinkedIn, and this person said, "If you're not doing PLG, you're an idiot." Basically, and all companies like sales is not even going to be a thing in like 3 years or something like this. And I thought,
Mhm.
okay, that's it. We've reached the peak. It's
Yeah.
downhill from there. And that same expert, now talks a lot about product-led sales because that didn't happen.
Yeah. No, it's very real. I mean, is it Lenny, did a study, I think, of like what the different growth models, the evolution
Oh,
of
I
growth
saw
models
this.
across a bunch of different companies, which I thought was really
It
interesting.
was really interesting because a lot of the companies that had been the real superstars of
Of
product-led growth,
PLG. Yeah.
as they moved up market,
Yeah.
started adding a lot of sales horsepower,
Mhm.
and a lot of them are doing now the majority of their deals are getting done with sales, so
Yeah, but those are typically actually, I wonder if that's always the case. So what I was gonna ask before when you were talking about this was, like, the go-to-market motion, I guess, and what I mean by that is, like, the distribution models that they're leveraging and whether or not they've decided to double down on, like, outbound or if sales is actually going out and finding new deals versus sales being more focused on more supporting like, from a product-led sales standpoint, like, more inside sales. I don't even know if that's a term that's used anymore, inside
Well, I'll
sales.
tell you something, like, I don't see a lot of companies doing pure cold outbound. Like, I don't see any companies doing pure cold outbound.
I do.
Almost nobody I'm working with is doing that. Like, they're smarter than that.
Oh, yeah, I
So
we're
so
not
they're
generally we're yeah, that's right.
they're smarter than that. So they're, at a minimum, they've got a very targeted account list they're chasing, at a minimum. Like, that would be the most cold I see,
Mhm.
is the company has gotten very clear on,
Like, they have a hit
this
list.
is the
Yeah,
criteria list,
yeah,
and from that criteria list, each rep has a short list of accounts, and their job is to get something cooking in that short list of
yeah, they're
accounts.
doing
And
account-based marketing.
often, there's a marketing motion associated with that. So, the marketers have the same short list of accounts, and they're running very targeted campaigns, whether it's advertising or getting these people to show up for events or getting these people to consume their content or whatever. And what marketing's trying to do is give these accounts a way to raise their hand, and then the salespeople are on them like paint and whatever. So, I think sometimes people have this idea that when we say we have sales, sourcing a deal, that they're taking a page out of the phone book and just calling randos.
Right. But a lot of them
And
do. A lot of them actually do.
I honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'm working with bigger, smarter companies
You
or something,
are.
but I don't work with anybody doing that.
Yeah, we end up hearing from a lot of the teams that are like, "We tried outbound or we tried ads." We've been doing that for a while, and we know that that's not the best thing to do, and then we're trying to help them identify what their inbound opportunity is. How do we identify the people that have the problem that you
Right.
solve, and where what are their watering holes, where are they hanging out so that you
That's right.
can
Where do
be
they hang
there,
out? Where do they cluster? All that stuff.
and how do you say the right thing?
But I think, where we do have sales sourcing deals, it's generally not just a Wild West thing. It's a very targeted thing. And then they're trying to figure out marketing and if there's a product-led motion like a free trial or something else going on is just another data point for these salespeople to decide whether this account is, open to a
Yeah.
call.
So some teams that we work with, and I don't consider this to be product-led sales, sometimes what we're doing is we discover that there's a functional user involved early that needs to validate before they'll float it up the food chain.
I think this is perfect opportunity for product-led growth. Like, if there
Yeah.
is a functional user that is a potential big blocker, let's just remove the blockage.
Yeah, but in that scenario, I would consider that person the champion, at least the initial. And, sometimes we're working with teams that are so well, I don't wanna say they're so risk averse because obviously introducing PLG is a big deal. Like, that it requires dev, it requires you've gotta make so many decisions about, the product
So many
being and
decisions, and it's so messy if it fails.
that's right. So what we, sometimes recommend is and I don't know that this is a term, but I call it like faux freemium, where you're just giving them a sandbox account to kick the tires on their own. It's
Yeah.
not real freemium. It's not real PLG. Well, I mean, it could be considered real PLG depending on who you're talking to, but it's kind of a kick the tires account that you can't actually get that much value from. But when you can get in there, maybe you've said you've got a franchise of quick serve restaurants. And once you get into the product, you see how it would look for quick serve, a franchise of quick serve restaurants, or,
Right.
that's as a real, example. So you can basically populate that sandbox account so that it emulates what it would look like, and feel like to use this product, even though they can't actually use it. They can't actually upload any of their own, data, whatever. That is not a high risk like initiative, right? Because like generally, I say it's not a high risk because generally the sales team already has these sandbox accounts all over the place. They use them in demos all the time. And so it's not a big lift from a technical standpoint to roll out something like that. And it often gives the sales team like that much more qualified folks to reach out to. Capture email address before you give that access to that account. So
Yeah.
still getting their information. And then if they fall into your ICP and they've actually kicked the tires on this sandbox account, well, that's a way better, more qualified lead for you to, spend your time on. But that's not what I
Absolutely.
think of that's not product led sales. That's just like leveraging the product for sales. But product
Yeah.
led sales is much more, in my opinion anyway, and I think this is probably pretty universal, like it's much more programmatic and at scale allows you to see, hey, our product is being used in really interesting ways, either because of number of seats or some sort of, product usage. And they fall into this ICP criteria where all of a sudden they're a product qualified account. And then you can look in
Yes.
that account and say, there's my PQL. There's the person inside of that account that I care about. And we've done actually jobs research with, teams on this where we do the initial jobs to be done research on the front end. So we identify who's coming through the front door. How do those people use the product? How does that the complexity sort of get added? I shouldn't say complexity. Really what I mean is value. And then how do we identify the person in that account that is actually the decision maker and the economic buyer? And we've done research as well where we've like coupled that with talking to their biggest customers, their actual like enterprise deals, and saying, how did this thing start? Like, who was the first person? How was the product used? what was valuable to you? Who was the second person?
Yeah, this is great to understand how the thing moves around in an
Totally,
account.
and that gives you your ICP, because then you
Yeah,
can say, "Okay, here's the lookalike companies," right? Like,
yeah,
here's the industries that
exactly.
popped up. Here's the teams, the initial team and then the adjacent teams that started using the product. So if you sort of reverse engineer their experience, and then you're giving sales ICP data and marketing ICP data, and you're also giving them, you can give them the demographic and firmographics, but you also have that understanding of, like, the psychographics. What do they care about? And what do they come for and what matters to them, and
Yeah,
also the product usage so that it can
yeah,
be programmatically, served up to sales. Now, I say where this falls
love
down,
it.
of course, is that it's a really hard thing to do. And there's got to be a lot of, like, sales and product have got to be in lockstep about what this means and to who. And I think the glue that has the potential to bind that is a really strong product marketing function, but that's often missing.
I agree with that. I think product marketing is technically the glue that brings it together, but I don't know, but often it's this amorphous growth team that,
Mhm.
again, we like to give different names for things that have always existed, but
Yeah, so I would say that, like, the biggest things that I'm to go back to your original question, the biggest thing that I challenge is, like, sales jumping in too early. Being a misalignment with product around, like, what this all means and what this needs to look like, because product has to be a really active participant in this product-led sales motion. If they're not a part of it, the whole thing falls down, obviously, and that goes for sales as well. So they have to be in lockstep about, like, what does this need to look like? But also, I see a lot of teams go like, "Well, there's tools for this now," and then they end up falling into this trap of relying on best practices that the tools are giving them instead of relying on what customers actually need. Why are you making that face?
so what do you mean by that? What do you mean? Explain that. Like, what do you mean by they're relying on the tool? Like, what kinda
So there's
tool?
a lot of product-led sales tools that have come onto the market in the last couple of years that promise product-led sales for these companies, and they have these, like, playbooks.
Oh,
So they're like, "Okay, well, tell us your ICP." Like, they haven't done the work to find out and do that sort of reverse engineering of, like, what does a successful enterprise customer look like? How did they start using the product? What did that product usage look like? When did that economic buyer not always necessarily show up, but when does that economic buyer, that champion, need to show up? Like, when does this shadow IT thing have to get cut off?
right,
Um, and
right.
who is that person? They haven't done any of that work. They don't know how it
Oh,
goes from one
interesting.
team to another, and they go into these playbooks with these teams. I'm not gonna name products here, but a lot of them come with playbooks, and the sales teams are like, "Well, the playbook in this tool that I'm using determines their strategy," instead of actually figuring out when sales should be involved or when they shouldn't be
Yeah,
involved.
that sounds bonkers. That sounds bonkers.
It's so scary because there's so much on the line. There's so much revenue on the line in those cases. That's what scares me about it. I'm like, you're
Yeah,
you're foiling this, like, massive revenue opportunity,
right.
and you're just throwing out somebody else's playbook at it. Like, what?
Yeah, that sounds like cuckoo town to me.
Yeah.
But coming back to this one where sales jumps too early, like, how do you get around that? Is that just product and sales getting together and making a decision? Like, these are the conditions that have to happen before you should be reaching out to these customers? Like, because it seems to be pretty prevalent, right? And I don't like often I find this like, I used to find this when, if sales was jumping the gun and trying to jump into accounts that weren't ready yet, then I'm talking about a non-product like growth thing. It was usually because sales just didn't have enough stuff to do. And so it was like, we had to make sure that we were keeping them busy with leads from other places or with a target account list for them to go after
Yeah,
or some other stuff
that's
going
right.
on. Like, I was curious what you saw. Like, is that how do you stop this sales team from reaching out to these accounts that just aren't ready yet?
It's different if it's a sales team, if it's a predominantly sales-led product that adds in a PLG, the answer is different than if it is a PLG product who is then layering in product-led sales. And in that scenario where it is a predominantly product-led company that layers in sales because 'cause they're moving up market, as all mature good mature PLG companies do, and they need to, they move up market, they start selling to more sophisticated what ends up happening is they have such a small sales org that they can't tackle everything at the same time. And so they shouldn't be, right? They should be preserving their energy for like the leads that actually legitimately need them versus just, oh, an ICP showed up through the front door, like let's go get them.
Right.
Which is
Right.
different if you're learning and you're, in learning mode, it's a little bit different. But if you're in a situation where you've got a small sales org and you're trying to layer in on top of a product-led organization, not all customers are created equally. Not all leads, to you, PQLs are created equally. So like use your resources wisely and actually
For
talk
sure.
to the people that get value, and you won't even need to sell them. It's going to be such a no-brainer for them because they're going to be like, oh, I've got 15 people using this product and I should have, a purview over them. I should have admin access. I should know that my security standards are being met. I should know,
That's right.
there's all these things that are needed. It's going to be so obvious. You're not even really going to need to sell them. So like make good decisions. Don't waste your time on people that aren't ready. But again, it's a different scenario if you've got this big sales team that's twiddling their thumbs.
Yeah, they're the ones that are gonna jump the gun.
And that's a leadership problem. That's not a sales team problem. That's a leadership problem.
Yeah, a sales and marketing leadership problem, in my opinion. We're coming near the end of the time. Would you like to leave us with any parting pearls of wisdom?
I mean,
Anything we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this too. But I would say that if you were a product-led company looking to move up market and have an offering for these more sophisticated, more complex customers, don't just blindly build out a sales team because you've got one sales guy that says he can scale up the team. Actually learn first from those more complex, more sophisticated customers. How did they adopt your product? How did it go from being a PLG for them to needing, something more complex? Learn about the product adoption patterns, learn about the team adoption patterns, because if you can sort of reverse engineer that and then, identify who that ICP is coming to the front door, then you can tag them appropriately when they sign up. You can recognize when they turn into a PQA, and then your sales team can go and look and find out who's the appropriate person to talk to.
I think that's super advice, and I think, I also think that the company should open their mind a little bit more and think about, why does the customer need a salesperson involved? Like, what is the role? What is the salesperson getting done here that couldn't get done in the product? And, and then question number one is, do we actually need a salesperson to do that? Or could we just do that? Are we falling down the product somewhere? If we do need a salesperson to do it, then let's be clear on what the salesperson's job is here,
Yeah.
right? So if the salesperson's job is to come in and sell a different persona that isn't a user, then let's talk about how that happens. Let's talk about what's the right moment for the salesperson to reach out. Let's make sure they understand what the value proposition is at
What do
that
they care about?
level.
Yeah,
And that might be very different from the value proposition at the user level. So
it
I think
is.
there just needs to be some deeper thinking about, like, we can't just throw sales at it to do the same thing that the product is doing. Like, if we need sales resources, we need them for a reason. So what is the salesperson's job in that situation? Are we clear on it? Are we clear who the persona is that they're talking to? Are we clear on the positioning and the value props in there? And then what constitutes really a qualified account so that they're ready? And I think if you do all that, that's good. But I mean, hard, right? Like when you actually lay it out, it
Yeah.
sounds super hard.
And when you start talking to customers, you realize, oh, there's actually a lot of stuff that we are not doing in this product today that these more sophisticated customers need. And then you're going to
Well,
keep the
there's
product team
that,
real
right?
busy.
Like, are you even ready to go win in
That's
that
right.
market?
That's right. And be honest, be honest with yourself about what the value is that you're providing today. Because if you're newer to this enterprise space, you're gonna learn right quick that like actually you don't have a lot of the features and the functionality that they're looking for. And that's why I was talking about the relationship between sales and product being like real and candid with what the product can actually do. Because like there's gonna be a disconnect there, but it's a great opportunity. And there's the crawl, walk, run version of this. And, just make sure sales it feels like they're in a good position to be able to actually provide something of value and, say things that these customers actually care about instead of it being a bit of a pipe dream because your product actually isn't ready for those more sophisticated customers. There's sometimes some catching up to do. So yeah, it's a big thing. But at the end of the day, again, I'm going to rely on spend some time learning about what is actually going to provide value to those customers before you go and build out this big old sales team that might be.
It's just driving everybody crazy.
Yeah. 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 It's a big topic. There's a lot there, but there's a crawl, walk, run, I think, in all of these scenarios. If you're sales led and you want to layer in product, a PLG motion, if you're a PLG and you want to layer in a sales led, there is a path, but there's a crawl, walk, run in all of those scenarios. Hopefully they become a little bit more obvious when we were talking about this, but yeah, that's probably a good place to wrap up.
Well, thanks. This was fun.
Yeah.
We should do this again sometime.
Yeah, we should. Okay.
We're very bad at organizing these things. We both have busy schedules. And so by the time we do it, it's like 3 months after we originally said we were going to do it. But yeah, look at us getting it done.
I know. Totally. We're gonna get better at this, April.
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
All right. Bye. Bye.
And that's it for this episode of the Forget the Funnel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about the topic that we covered, don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn, or you can visit our website at forgetthefunnel.com. Also, if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and help spread the word by leaving a rating or a review. Okay, see you next time.